Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard Al, and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. My guest on today's podcast, John D., got sober in 2019, decades after the first court-ordered AA meetings he attended, with absolutely no interest in the program whatsoever. Even the week-long coma he suffered after being thrown from a car in a drunken crash did little to inhibit his drinking. John was raised in affluence by parents who largely neglected his emotional needs growing up. Seeking the love and acceptance he was missing at home, he found relief in alcohol. Inebriation quelled John's loneliness and insecurities as he became a functional alcoholic. Career success and marriage hid his growing dependence on alcohol. Inevitably, his behavior under the influence devolved into trouble at work and at home. By the time that behavior became intolerable to his wife and unsustainable in his business life, John finally became ready to stop drinking. His previous experience in AA and time spent in an IOP laid a path into the rooms. That's where John found the similarities to other alcoholics that he had brushed off in earlier attempts to stay sober. He found an action-oriented sponsor, worked the steps, and became a daily attendee at meetings. He began sponsoring other men, which drew him closer to the middle of the program. His tireless efforts helped restore John's marriage and family relationships. His commitment to his sobriety became foremost, and the gifts just continue to manifest in his life today. I believe you'll gain much from hearing John's story, especially for those listeners who are early in sobriety. His inspirational message of hope sheds a bright light on the life-changing effects of AA. No matter where you are along the road of recovery, you are sure to enjoy the next hour of AA Recovery Interviews with my friend and AA brother, John D.
I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, John. That's the typical response people have around the world, most AA meetings.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you were able to join me tonight on the AA Recovery Interviews podcast. You and I just got out of a meeting, which is one of my favorite times to do the interviews because AA and what we've been talking about is fresh in your mind. And what'd you think of the meeting tonight?
I thought it was great. And specifically, we saw Eric, who just came back after a relapse, and he and I have known each other for over 10 years, and he got me to come to this meeting for the first time.
5 years ago?
5 years ago.
What's your sobriety date?
So 5/26/19, 2019.
So you just celebrated 5 years.
Yes.
I think I was in some of the meetings where you got your chip.
Yep. Tuesday meeting, yeah.
I noticed that your wife accompanied you.
Yeah.
That's pretty special to be able to share that chip, isn't it?
Yeah, it was great.
And
Absolutely.
she participates in Al-Anon?
She tried some Al-Anon. She mostly does adult children,
Mm-hmm.
and she really enjoys it. It's a lot of work, but yeah. So it's nice for the two of us to be in a 12-step program together.
Had she been in ACA before you got involved in AA?
No, but at the beginning of our relationship, she didn't drink, and she was going to meetings, but it was more for other addictions. So she, in some regards, was a little bit of my higher power at the beginning. I wasn't going to meetings, but I knew she didn't drink, and so I just didn't drink around her because, we started dating, and I was in love with her, and we kicked it off well. So that was kind of one of the things that kind of helped me out with her sobriety.
How many years ago was that you guys got married?
We got married 31 years ago.
31 years ago. So in those early days, you weren't drinking because she wasn't drinking?
I guess if I back up, I was pretty heavy in college, started in high school, and had a lot of, fallout from some of that. I met her while I was living in New York, and I had a DWI, so I was going through my mandatory AA meetings. And then I met her through a mutual friend at a blind date, and she just wasn't drinking. And so I was I was doing the AA thing because of the DWI, but I wasn't committed.
You weren't invested in it, were you?
No. And so, but because of her, I wouldn't drink around her, and we had a relationship. I eventually lost my job in New York, and she was living in Michigan. She was going to the University of Michigan. And so I went out there, and we started our relationship, started to live together, and I wasn't drinking for a good year, and we moved to Colorado together. And so in Colorado, I tried a few meetings. I was connected with a mutual friend who was sober. He had 30 years of sobriety, I think. And I was focused on a relationship, and I was focused on getting out of New York and starting a new life. So there was the people, places, and things that were kind of driving me out of New York and into a different life, thinking that would change everything and keep me sober.
How were you feeling about having to go to AA as punishment for your DWI?
In the town I grew up in, there was a lot of my friends got in trouble. It was all around drinking, a lot of DWIs. We all had a lawyer that we could call on. And so we called on this lawyer, and he would set up, we'd go to court, get a slap on the wrist, go do your punishment. You do a couple of weeks of IOP, and then you have to continue on and do AA meetings. And in the IOP, turns out there was a lot of my friends or people I knew or acquaintances. And so we just never took it. It was just like punishment, like staying after school. And, the ego in me and all this, it just never resonated. And then once I was living in New York City, though my DWI was in Connecticut, I had to still find a place to do the AA, so I did it in New York. And there, we're supposed to say or look at the similarities, not the differences. I was constantly looking at the differences. My ego was just, I have to drink, I have to be going out to parties, meeting people, upward trajectory in my business. I have to drink. And I just didn't stop.
Were you drinking while you were going to AA pretty much?
No. I was a binge drinker. I would drink, certainly in New York City, Wednesday night started it. But during that time, I was in that, I'm in trouble. I've got to be a good boy.
How long of a period was that? What were the terms of the going to AA?
Oh, it was probably maybe 3 or 4 months.
That's a pretty light sentence for DWI, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it never became a DWI. My lawyer got me out. Yeah.
He assured the court that you were going to go into
Whatever.
IOP or into AA.
Right.
So what were you thinking as you were sitting there in AA meetings with people who had the earnest desire to stay sober? You mentioned focusing on the differences, but what was going through your mind as you were sitting there listening to these people, or were you?
I was listening, and some of it was I could relate to, but then other parts of it were, oh my God, this is a commitment. A sponsor, that's a commitment.
Yeah.
I don't want to be around somebody the rest of my life. I was just future tripping, and it just was taking the one day at a time out of it and just not listening, find the similarities, find some help, and also life being unmanageable. I was not accepting the unmanageability.
It's a hard program to work when you're not accepting the two basic tenets of the program, that your life is unmanageable and that you're powerless.
Yeah.
I didn't accept the fact that I was powerless and my life was unmanageable until I'd been sober for a couple of years. I admitted it because that's what you're supposed to do. But I still, even in my early, couple years of sobriety, I still thought, I could probably go back to drinking at some point, but let me just get through this. And it wasn't until I accepted the unmanageability and powerlessness that things started to change. So you were sitting there mouthing the words and saying what you needed to say to get through the process?
Yeah, get the paper signed and get up, get out as soon as I could.
So you had your first AA meeting then what? You said about 30 years ago?
Yeah.
Wow. And after that time, John, were there times in intervening between 5 years ago when you finally got sober and when you went to your first AA meetings, was it a recurring idea or thought that came up for you, or was it just something out of mind until you started to crash?
Well, I think if I back up to even prior to that DWI, in my junior year of college, summer between junior and senior year, I had a party at my house. My parents were away, and I got in the car. A friend of mine had stored his car at my house. It was a fancy sports car, and I took a friend. We got in the car, don't even remember, and made it a couple miles down the road, and next thing you know, I'm in the hospital. And I was in a coma for about a week. Luckily, my friend survived. I got thrown out of the car. At that point, I should have I should have listened that my life was unmanageable. First of all, I was unconscious, so the police couldn't arrest me for anything. I mean, I was just lucky to be alive. And my parents, life was a party. They were always drinking, and they were just like, "You drive too fast. You shouldn't be, drinking and driving. That's not a good mix for you." I should have. And then I went back to college, and I didn't drink after that. I was so mad, and I couldn't even. I could barely get through my senior year because my mind. I had broken my skull. I was unconscious after the accident. I had to rehab.
It's like brain injury?
It wasn't really a brain injury, but enough that I had ringing in my ear all the time, and I couldn't remember things. So going to school, I was just having to really study hard and I almost failed out my first semester. Luckily, things started to come back, and I was able to get my grades up to graduate. And I lost all my friends. I was so mad. I went back to live in not a frat house, but with some of my frat brothers in a house that we had off campus. And after one night, they were raging and partying and doing their thing, and I just got up and I ripped the stereo out of the wall, and I said, "God damn, I can't do this. You guys are partying too late." And I moved out, and I moved into another house with two people. I don't even know their names to this day. I was just, that was the start of the chaos of alcohol in my life.
That's a lot of chaos coming when you're 20, 22 years old, something around that age. You mentioned that the folks were party-type people. What was your family of origin like? What was it like growing up in your house with regard to drinking and other behaviors that might have influenced you as you got older?
So I grew up in a very affluent community with a very similar set of children and parents. The parents worked very hard. They had very little emotional sobriety, and the children were kind of all left to do their thing. Yet in my family, it was very regimented. My mother and father wanted us to do all the right things, go to the right schools, and because of that, there was just not a lot of hugging and emotion. It was just go to school, get good grades, get a job. So I was good at all that, but I was the only boy out of 4 children, and my father was working or playing golf. That was his life.
So he was just not there.
Not there. And when, typical things, I look back when it was baseball practice, all the dads showed up, but mine was on the golf course. So I was eventually going, well, I guess baseball's not for me. I didn't compute that I didn't have the nurturing I needed. But that was early on, and then it just kind of progressed. Unless I played golf, then my dad was always there, but then it was, why aren't you playing up to this level? And, there was just a lot of pressure to perform. And my mother was a bit of the same. She wanted us to be a certain way and do a certain thing. They were very Catholic. That kind of covered their spiritual aspects of life. So we went to church every weekend together. So we were close in one regard, but in other regards, just not emotionally connected.
One of the things I've noticed in talking with folks during these interviews who have similar stories is that the idea that if everything looks okay to the outside world, that's all that really matters. And what's the picture that we're putting out there for the people around us to see? And so often a picture-perfect family from the outside is one in a great deal of turmoil on the inside. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I just felt like I was not given a roadmap and how to navigate life. My high school, our graduating class was 35, so very small boys' school, and we were all pretty much the same as far as parents were high achievers doing their thing, and we were left to do what we wanted. It was almost like every weekend it would be, whose parents are away? Oh, my parents were, okay, we're going to have a big party at your house. Okay, great. So it was just this revolving door of whose house are we partying at? And it was all about trying to find camaraderie, friendship, yet we were missing the key ingredient is just nurturing from our family. And so we were all trying to do the right thing, trying to be good at sports, good at school. And then on the weekends, it was just, binge drinking.
Now, your siblings, the girls...
3 sisters. I'm second oldest.
You're second oldest. Were they facing a lot of the same things you were facing?
I think so. But given they were girls, they kind of had each other in that sense of, so I didn't play baseball, didn't play football. I didn't do any of the guy thing. I played hockey, and that was the one thing. My mom would drop me off at 6 o'clock in the morning before school, and I'd play hockey in the winter. And that was probably the only real team sport that I spent a lot of time doing when I was younger. And then there was mostly skiing, golf. I played golf later on. I was big into cycling, which was just basically a sport by yourself. All those single kind of sports. So I just had no camaraderie, really, other than the guys I drank with.
Do you remember your first drink that you took, let's say on your own volition?
Yeah, I had friends, and they were usually the same ilk. Their parents were heavy drinkers, and this one of my neighbors across the street, his father was an advertising executive, and he advertised all these beers.
Oh, wow.
And so he had this outdoor shed. The brands were Coors and Ringnes, which is some, Norwegian beer or something. And so there was just stacks of beer. And he would never know that the beer was gone. And so we just constantly take 1 or 2, 3 or 4. And then this neighbor also liked to smoke pot. And so I would try it. And I wasn't big on marijuana, but alcohol, beer, that worked for me.
How old were you when that was going on?
I was probably 7th or 8th grade, so middle school.
Yeah, so 13, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems to be the general age when people start drinking or smoking pot or doing both. What were you going for whenever it was that you would drink? Were you trying to get someplace, or was the drinking the getting drunk just a byproduct of the fact that you were already drinking?
I think for me, drinking was a social event.
Yeah.
So it was trying to be with others.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little bit, certainly at the early stages, it was just being mischievous, devious. It gave me courage.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. It was just something that gave me courage to do things, whether it was, we'd always camp out. I lived in the country. There was woods all around, and we just always say, oh, we're going camping. And parents would be like, fine, and steal some beer, and we'd go out, have a campfire with a couple of the guys in the neighborhood, and we just drink beer. And it just kind of started from there, but I felt this courage to do other things. One day, we decided, let's break into the high school, or the junior high it was, and we stole chocolate milk or some ridiculous thing. There was no reason to do it, but it was this kind of thrill seeking,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that was it. But then, as it progressed, it was like, I want to really get fucked up.
Yeah.
I just want to get, but not to the point of. I wanted to take it to the limit without passing out. I didn't want to get that bad, though it progressed to be blacking out eventually. It was just really a way to get some courage and drop the fears, and those fears of maybe it was abandonment from my parents, whatever it was. I mean, looking back, I can be as analytical as possible, now that I have a clear mind, and there's a lot of things, family of origin. But the number one thing for me, I just felt like I was a boy trying to navigate life without a shepherd.
Yeah, without the parental guidance that some of us get.
Yeah.
I never really got that either. And when I was growing up, I was kind of on my own. My folks, I used to pride myself on being able to go and do whatever it was I wanted without my folks really knowing or caring too much. And yet, what I realized, the downside of having all that freedom is that you have that freedom because nobody really cares where you are or what you're doing. And after a while, you start to realize that there are people around who don't care. And suddenly that kind of outweighs all the freedom you get from them not caring, that you're not getting the attention, the love, the positive regard that parents should probably give their kids if they expect them to turn out okay. So you ramped up the drinking through middle school and high school?
Yeah, high school was definitely, started out ninth grade. We'd have a off-site camping, get to know all the new freshmen, and there was a bunch of kids. It was a new class, and some of these kids I didn't know, and they were off smoking pot in the back of the campsite, and I wanted to be their friends. So, that was where I meandered over to. I knew one of the kids, and I didn't know the couple of the others, but I wanted to be part of the clique.
Yeah.
And so that was always the pull for me, was just to
fit in.
To fit in.
Yeah, yeah. So you made it through high school. What were your grades like?
They were pretty good. I mean, the school was pretty competitive, and there was no, if you slacked, you got kicked out. So there was not a lot of room for slacking off. And I was trying to be a good boy all the time, and I was trying to excel. I always took advanced placement classes, and I wouldn't say I was the smartest by any stretch, but I tried hard. And I was the class treasurer, and eventually I was captain of the ski team, captain of the soccer team. So I excelled, but then on the weekends I excelled in partying as well, as did my classmates.
Yeah, I get that. You said it was a relatively small class, too.
Yeah.
So you guys all knew each other, and you all lived near each other and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what was the next phase after high school?
So the next phase, as typical, was going to college. And looking back, I probably wouldn't have picked the college that I went to. and I just went through the system. Everything was the system. You had your guidance counselor. He told you, here are the schools you should go to. And so I went, I looked at them, and got into one, went there, and there was a lot of drinking. I was skillful at that, and so immediately got involved with the frat system, and I went Greek. And actually, I was a social brother in one fraternity and a committed brother in another. I couldn't say which one I wanted to go to. The one that I did get into was less of a party house, so it was kind of my safe haven. But then I went over to the other frat all the time and was there pretty much most of the time partying. Junior year, I went to France for the year. In France, we would have wine at school for lunch. And you got one glass, but it was, we drank a lot of wine. And I was staying in a house, I remember, and the poor lady, we stole so much of her wine. She had a wine cellar, and we'd go down there and just grab it. Every time she went away to see her family, she'd be like, take care of her mother, who was probably 90 years old. We had to put her to bed, and we were drunk. And it was something else. But so drank a lot of wine and just traveled around and saw the sights. I came home. My parents were away. Hey, I'm back. Let's have a party. And that was probably in June, and I was in the hospital the next day, and in the hospital for a couple of weeks with a coma, and then it was just a blur the rest of the summer. And then going back to school, the doctor said, don't go back to school, you're not going to be able to function. But I was just on this, got to graduate, got to get a job. I had an internship on Wall Street, and so I was ready to go, and I just wouldn't stop. And that's part of that emotion. No emotions, just go, and you look back, going through these meetings and talk about self-centered and ego, and all those character defects were running me wild.
Yeah, it sounds like, and that plus the physical aftermath of your injuries, sounds like they really got in the way of you getting properly settled after college.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I want to ask you about, did you notice a change in your relationship with your parents once you became an adult and were able to drink around them or be in their presence, and or was the relationship still like it was when you were younger?
I think there was a little bit of maturity around them, but it was still drinking and seeking their love and attention, and that was a common bond, was alcohol.
Yeah.
Everything around my house, looking back, was about alcohol. My dad would come home from work, and he taught me how to make him a scotch. And he'd be like, you just take the scotch, put a shot in, then you turn the water on at the faucet, and then run the glass underneath, and that's it. And so, from a young age, I was like, here's your scotch, Dad. I mean, I can jump ahead to my sobriety, and I was only able to get sober after my parents passed away. And actually, my sobriety date is 2 days after my mom died.
Wow. That relationship or lack thereof had a real hold of you for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, we'd sit up at night, my mom and I especially. My dad would go to bed, and my mom and I would sit up and talk and drink. She'd drink vodka, I'd drink a bottle of wine. And, then she'd finally go to bed, and I'd probably stay up and continue to drink another bottle of wine.
I couldn't wait until I was able to get out of my parents' house. I just, for everything I got and didn't get, and for all the abuse that I had as a kid as I got older and could make my own decisions about what I was going to do, I couldn't wait to get out of the house. How long were you around your folks after you got out of college?
So as soon as I graduated, my parents weren't about taking care of us. As far as when you're graduated, you should have, and they made sure they helped me with connections and getting jobs. So I was in New York City working, but I always came home on the weekends. And I didn't like Manhattan. I liked the country. I liked riding my bike. I liked the parties.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to lose my lifestyle in Connecticut. I was drinking in New York, so I was on Wall Street. Everybody was drinking. And so Wednesday night started parties, and then you'd kind of be hungover Thursday, Friday, and then I was out on the weekends out to Connecticut, come back Sunday night. I'd be kind of drying out till Wednesday and then start all over again.
Did you ever feel like you were missing something not being there on the weekends?
Staying in Manhattan during the weekend was, at that time, there was nothing going on. It was like a fairly dead city back in the day. It was late 80s. And there were certainly some of my friends were still around. There were those that were working around town. But most of the more successful, I guess, of my friends were not sticking around. They were moving out. And I think my drinking caught up to me at that point. I had this job and I would travel, and I would cover a lot of the offshore funds down in the islands, like Bermuda, Bahamas, Caymans. And I'd go down there and talk to these various funds. That was a whole nother, rum parties, and they all liked to drink down there. And so I'd come back to work, but I wasn't generating numbers. I wasn't hugely profitable, and my boss kind of said, maybe this isn't for you, and maybe we'll give you another job over here. I said, no. I think at that point, I was then I had the DWI. So I was just like, okay, New York, it's all about New York. This isn't my place. Connecticut, I like going out to the country. I needed to get out of this city. And, we say that God does things for you that you can't do for yourself. I said, fine, I'm leaving. So I quit the company I was with, or it was a mutual.
Right,
Like, you're not doing well, but.
Did you ever connect the not doing well or any of the stuff that was going on with the drinking itself? Were you still keeping those in different silos?
I was keeping them in different, like, this isn't the job for me. I'm not made to do this. My mind doesn't think this way. Whatever excuse I could. But then the other side of me, the alcohol was impeding my lifestyle. One was lifestyle and fun. My bicycling was not, I wasn't doing well. I was racing hungover and things like that. So there was this, I want to achieve, but I can't achieve on the physical side. And then on the work side, I just said, it's just not my personality. And it's the city. I don't like the city. It makes me drink. I was blaming people, places, and things.
Now, how old were you during this period of time when all this was going on?
So I was in my mid-20s.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying listening to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the 3rd and 4th editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Have a free listen to Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon. While you're there, treat yourself to another audiobook I produced, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a comfortable, meaningful, and engaging way to listen to the Big Book, anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. You're going to love it. And we're back. So you're still in the process of getting your career. You had the experience on Wall Street and being able to travel and drink and be on the company dime, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you decided to leave that at some point, but you weren't attributing what was going on at work to alcohol. You kept them pretty separate from each other.
Right.
In terms of how one affected the other. I guess we talk about functional alcoholism. Would you say you were a functional alcoholic at that time?
Yeah, but barely. We talk about alcohol and how it stunts your maturity. I think my maturity had been stunted for many years. I just wasn't connecting the partying and my success. I wasn't able to make the right choices for myself to begin with. I mean, I shouldn't have taken the job in New York anyway. That's what was expected of me. This is the path you're on. So I finally was able to make a choice for myself. Mm-hmm. Leave New York, stop drinking, and go somewhere else. And I knew that my ex-girlfriend, or the girl that I had dated a few times, wasn't drinking, didn't drink, and she lived out in Michigan. And then I was able to connect with some old friends from college in Chicago. And I said, I'm coming to Chicago. I'm going to stop off in Michigan, see this girl. I did. And then I went on to Chicago. I started working in Chicago. And then I would go back and forth and see her. I mean, she was not drinking just because she didn't want to. She wasn't going to meetings. But she was staying sober, and she was helping me stay sober. Just because I think I made her my higher power.
So you acknowledged the problem, made her the higher power. She had a capacity for helping you keep yourself sober, but you were staying sober for her and for the relationship.
Right. And so she just thought I was sober, but I wasn't 100% upfront with her. I just said I didn't tell her all about my DWI problems in New York. I just said I'm leaving New York and I'm moving to Chicago.
So back and forth between Michigan and Chicago, how long did you do that for?
We did that for a few months, and then she moved to Chicago with me. Then Chicago was another city, and for whatever, it got cold. It got really cold in a hurry. And I was trying to be true to myself. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about all the things that I liked, which was cycling, skiing, the outdoors. Mm-hmm. So then we decided to move to Boulder, Colorado. And so moved to Boulder, still sober, went to some meetings because I knew a friend of a friend. And then one of the cyclists that I trained with, he was sober, or at least at the time he was. I think he slipped, and I don't know where he is now. So it was a healthy outdoor lifestyle. It was everything that I really wanted inside. And so it was easy to stay sober.
So it was a non-drinking lifestyle.
Yeah.
Interesting that you're describing it as staying sober, because when we talk about staying sober, usually the only people who talk about staying sober are people who have a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Either a self-avowed alcoholic or somebody who knows they've got a problem, but they're not willing to admit it. They talk about staying sober. Sounds like you were just not drinking, but you were staying sober because in the back of your mind you knew you had a problem.
Yeah, I knew I had a problem, but it was a problem that I thought I could handle on my own.
Okay, there we go.
And the whole mental focus at the time was, if I put myself around the right people, the right place, the people, places, and things will keep me sober. And that's not, as we know, that can only last. You're white knuckling it. Mm-hmm. And so as I was living in Colorado and enjoying all this freedom, I finally had to say, I got to get a job. We lived pretty sparsely, but had fun for about 9 months. And then I got a job with a major oil company down in Denver. And next thing you know, I'm bringing a bottle of wine home. And I asked my then girlfriend to marry me. And so we got married, but the drinking started. And it wasn't like rampant, binge drinking. It was just, I'd have a bottle of wine and so she started too.
Did she ever question you in the beginning about it, though? Did she ever say anything like, you haven't been drinking? Are you sure you want to drink? Or did she just go with the flow?
She just kind of went with the flow. And we got married at Vail, and it was a dry wedding party. I mean, we were in a restaurant. There was no alcohol served, but then it's when I got the job and I had to go back into my old ways of thinking. I've got to be the dutiful husband. I've got to get a job. I need the financial security. All the things that were kind of driving my fear in New York were now starting in Denver. Then they transferred me to Houston maybe a year later. And we had a child, our first child, who was special needs. And at that point, it was just a slow progression, downhill spiral of drinking. I mean, I was functioning. I was doing well. I was getting jobs and moving up the ladder, but I was binging.
Tell me about the effect that having a special needs child had on your drinking behavior, your desire to deal with whatever's going on by drinking.
I think the fact that it was a way for me to just try to get out of the pain, the sorrow, and that responsibility of, oh my gosh, I've got to take care of this person the rest of my life or the rest of their life.
It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's very scary. It's, you can get married and you can get divorced, you can do things, but here's a helpless child. And so my actions from that day forward were, I've got to provide for this child, and I've got to put them in schools and therapies and all these things that were scary. And the only way to numb the pain was to drink.
So you were trying to balance both. You were trying to be there for your wife and your kid while at the same time needing to drink so it wouldn't drive you crazy.
Yeah, just to have some relief. I'd be working knowing that everything I did at work had to be right, and I had to be successful in order to pay the bills, to take care of this child and my wife. And then I had to deal with just my son and his therapies and just living with him in the sorrow that I was feeling. And so the only thing in between both of those things was a bottle of wine or, going out and partying with the guys at work and things like that.
Did you seek out any other help for yourself during that time?
No.
So the booze was doing it for you?
The booze was it. And then after a little while, my wife and I said, let's move back to Connecticut where we'd be around my family. And her family was in New Jersey or New York City. So we thought, that'll be great. Let's move back. And we did that, and that didn't work.
It's the geographical change we're always talking about, huh?
Yeah. Everybody was in their own life. They were doing their own thing, and there was no time to help us.
So all the help and understanding you thought you'd get from moving back, you didn't get.
Yeah. And so then as it turned out, the business that I started with a few other guys, we sold that, and the new owner said, John, would you like to help us buy a company down in Houston? And I said, I guess that's where I'm going to go. And so I moved back here.
So you've been down here for how long?
I've been down here this go around 24 years.
So a lot's gone on in that 24-year period, I take it.
Yeah.
How has your alcoholism affected your life since you went back to Connecticut? There's that period of time that starts in Houston. What were those 24 years like for you? Was it a steady decline? Was it ups and downs? What was your life like?
So moving back here, new job, new responsibilities, great success. And then my wife and I, we bought a farm outside of town, and that was isolation on the weekends and drinking. And so I'd go up there and I would just be there pretty much just having alcohol from getting up, doing whatever, lounging around and drinking till Sunday. And then sometimes I couldn't even leave to get to, usually I'd come home Sunday and then go to work Monday. The drinking progressed to the point where I'd have to get up at 3 a.m. on Monday morning and drive to work, because I was just like, I wanted to keep sitting on the porch and enjoying the country and drinking. And so that was bad. And my daughter finally said, as she was getting older, so we had my daughter when we were living in Connecticut, and then we moved down here. And, we thought it would be great for us to all be going out to the country on the weekends and having fun. And my daughter finally looked at us and said, all you do out here is drink and smoke. And I am alone. I have no fun. I have no friends.
How old was she when she said that?
She was probably maybe 5 years old, 6 years old.
God, out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? So she was saying to you what you could have said to your own parents, huh?
Yeah.
But didn't.
Yeah. So we sold the farm and moved back to the city.
Sounds like a wake-up call.
Yeah. I was getting paranoid at that time, too. I was just getting a lot of fear. My son was getting older. We tried so much to try to save him or make his life better. We had him in a school in Tennessee, but it was all to prepare him to live in assisted living the rest of his life. And the bills were piling up. It was expensive, and there was a lot of stress. And so the drinking and the smoking, so all my living in the country and exercise, it was just all deteriorating. Then by 2015, I got cancer. And that was all the stress that I was putting on myself, and the alcohol, it just wasn't, nothing was working.
What kind of cancer did you have?
I had testicular cancer.
That's rough.
Yeah. So, at that point I started praying, and I'll never forget the day that I was still unsure. At the time, the original diagnosis was lymphoma. Went to the doctors, and I said, how long do I have to live? Am I going to see my daughter graduate from high school? And the doctor, who didn't really have much bedside manner, said, how old's your daughter? And so at that point, I knew it was pretty serious. And I sat and started praying. And then I was listening to a tape, and they said on the tape, God hasn't dropped the ball on you. And he's there for you, and he's always been there for you. And don't think something is going to change that. And within literally 5 minutes, the phone rang, and it was the doctor who said, you don't have lymphoma. You've got this testicular cancer. And I jumped for joy, because the doctor said testicular cancer is curable.
Yeah.
Or certainly a lot more treatable than lymphoma. So that was like the first of a real spiritual awakening that I had. And it didn't, and I told God, I said, I am going to stop drinking at this point. You know, you saved me, I'm going to stop drinking.
So this was in 2015?
2015.
Okay, so that's 9 years ago.
Yeah,
You've been sober 5 years.
right.
So what happened during the 4 years?
So I got better from the cancer, and I didn't hold up
Thank
my
God, right?
yeah I didn't hold up my promise.
When you thought about that promise, when you were drinking, did the thought of what you had promised recur to you at all, or were you able to just put it aside, or justify it, or rationalize it if it was irrational to begin with? How were you dealing with what you must have remembered that you'd said to God and you weren't doing?
Yeah. You know, sometimes when we talk about self-will and how we can't do it, it's because we don't turn our will and our life over to a power greater than ourselves. And I wasn't doing it right. I was asking for things. I wasn't surrendering myself. It was a slow process. So I was drinking. There was no question. I was drinking. I wasn't working, and there was a point where a few of us who weren't working, who had worked together, would have lunch, and we were drinking at lunch. And then we said, this isn't good. Let's just, instead of stop drinking, let's stop having lunch together.
Right. Get that.
And subsequently, they stopped drinking, but self-will. Through the next few years, I was still drinking, and then my mother passed away, and I got so drunk that night with my sisters, and I have no idea. I had a blackout, and I hit my wife. And see, before, all my drinking and everything that I did, I covered up. Even my DWI. Here, my father's a lawyer. He could have helped me. But I went around and got another lawyer and didn't tell anybody in the family I had a DWI and just made it go away. And later my dad found out and he said, why didn't you call me? And my mental thinking at the time was, I want to be a good boy. I don't want to get in trouble, you know, even though I'm an adult. So now my mother's gone. My father had passed away a few years prior. And so I was just free. Yet I was caught by my sisters of this bad behavior. And then my wife just said, we're done. You're out. And so I got back to Houston. We were in Florida. I got back to Houston. I moved out of the house. And I went to the IOP. And then I didn't finish it. I got like 3/4 of the way through it. And I was doing this doesn't work, these, you know, the differences versus similarities, but I knew I had to stop drinking.
Now, that particular treatment center that you're talking about, IOP, there's a pretty strong integration with AA and going to meetings. Was that going on for you at that point as well?
Yeah. So at that point, I went to Wood. And by the grace of God, I raised my hand. I said, this is my first time here. And Art T and Brent came up to me and said, do you have a sponsor? Now, back in New York when I tried this, I'd say, yeah, I've got a sponsor. Yeah, I just kind of sat there and just backed away from everything. And there I just said, no, I don't. And then Art became my sponsor, and I worked the steps. And all of a sudden, I had this overwhelming relief of my life, all the things I'd been doing, and just there'd always been that this isn't me, or the shame of all the things, hiding things and going around people's backs so they wouldn't see how bad things were in my life. And it it stayed.
So that was in 2019. We're talking about right before COVID. How did COVID affect your program and your early sobriety?
So I moved out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
I had an apartment. I had one room where I'd do my work. I'd gone back to work after cancer in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing a consulting job with a company here in town. And so I didn't need to be in the office, and they didn't want us at the time being in the office. So
Sure.
I was able to do my work in one room, and then come lunchtime, I'd go into my bedroom where I had another computer, and I would Zoom. And so a lot of the meetings that I still go to, they were on Zoom. And then my sponsor and I would meet at Starbucks. We'd still able to sit outside and go over the big book. And then my sponsor said, hey, there's a group of us that are going to start meeting in the park. So we would meet in the park I forget when it was, every Sunday. And so we did that religiously. And so that was the bond, and that was the fellowship and all the things I was missing growing up from my father. A bunch of men helping me understand and navigate life and deal with life on a day-to-day basis. And
Well, the way I know it's been good for you, John, is by knowing Art and knowing how good for his sobriety sponsoring you has been. I remember when he first started sponsoring you, and I was really grateful to see how his program was just energized to another level. So the sponsorship of another man can improve the quality of one's own sobriety, because that's why we sponsor other people, just to keep ourselves sober. When you and your wife split, was it over the one occurrence, the one thing that you did when you said you hit her, or was that a culmination, the outcome of behavior on your part or on her part that led up to you leaving?
that was a culmination of, as I was drinking over the years, I was a bully. She put up with me. And it was just a lot of me trying to control. With my son and with my job, I felt like I'm in control. You can't tell me what to do. I look back at that and everything I did, and it's like we were talking about in our meetings, forgiveness, and we think we're doing the right thing all the time, but that's the selfishness and the self-centeredness. Though we think we're helping people along the way, but we're not. We're trying to help ourselves.
Yeah, a certain amount of manipulation going on there too.
So this, in front of my family, it was just, and my daughter was going through addiction at the time too. Thankful she's sober today. But it was just, everything was kind of falling apart at that time.
So once you got sober and you started working the steps with Art, when did you feel like you had turned the corner?
I think after the fourth step, you really start to look at yourself. And I look at all the sponsees that I've attempted to help, and we get to the fourth step, and it's like that's the jumping point. And it's like we were talking in the meeting today, it's like, what's your role in this? It's so easy to make that list of all your resentments and the people that have harmed you, but when you then, at the end of all that, say, what was your role? All of those resentments and things just kind of, they go away. It's where are you? What have you been doing?
And when you're spending your whole life being the victim, it's very, very difficult to see your part.
Exactly. And the alcohol covers it. You're living in chaos all the time. And the chaos, you're trying to fix it, and you're trying to make sure you can manage and not be seen and be criticized or called out. And so I developed a very poor attitude towards others and being told what to do, and it was just not a good relationship. And so, yeah, I was out living on my own for 2 years. And then things started to click, working the steps. My wife started to see me come back.
So you were sober for those 2 years?
Yeah.
Working the steps, having Art as a sponsor.
Yeah.
I was seeing you in meetings all the time, so I know you were going to a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
So for 2 years, you worked at it, and then what?
And then I moved back into the house. And then certainly there was an ultimatum. If I was caught drinking, it was, you're gone.
Lights out.
Yeah. And then there was a lot of trust building, and there still is.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed about trust in my own relationships is that trust lost is never recovered.
No.
A new trust has to be built. You know, I think some of the relationships I've seen amongst people I've sponsored and people I've known in the program is that when there's a fundamental trust that's broken, to try and re-establish or repair that trust is futile, and that there's got to be something else developed that may not have the same resiliency as that initial trust had, but the fact that that trust could be broken indicates that it probably is not going to get fixed right away. And so when you say it took a while to reestablish the trust and the ultimatum, that makes a lot of sense to me.
It's a new relationship, too.
Yeah.
I think that you will never, you may be forgiven, but there are memories that will...
Well, we won't wish to shut the door on it. And the reason we don't is because things will come up over time that, and I know in my own relationships over the years, things don't surface immediately, which is why sometimes we have to do multiple fourth steps. Sometimes have to do additional eighth and ninth steps because stuff just it's either inaccessible or it's not revealed in the most productive way. And when it comes up later, then we have to deal with it. But that sounds like a real challenge that you met with your sobriety and with the help of AA and a good sponsor. So how would you describe your relationship, your marriage today? This is 3 years after you went back to the house?
3 years after I went back, and the first year was pins and needles.
I'll bet.
And then it probably hasn't really gotten tight until the last year.
That's good.
And it was that we have new respect for each other.
Mm-hmm.
Both my sobriety and then my wife working her 12-step with adult children. She sees some of her role. It's like we both are doing a fourth step again, where what's our role in our relationship and how have we treated each other under the circumstances before. And
well, that's growth.
It's growth, but I've got to get my ego in check constantly, and coming to meetings, hearing things, and staying present on a daily basis is the key.
Staying right-sized, a friend of mine calls it.
Yes, in the middle of the herd all the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I know that you've sponsored some men. What you said about the fourth step has been absolutely true in my experience. I've lost more sponsees at the fourth step, and the unwillingness to do it or the sense that it can be put aside. And okay, some of those guys have come back. Guys who I've sponsored who have worked the steps, most of them are still sober, so that's a good thing to look forward to. But so you're doing sponsorship, you're going to meetings, you're praying. What's your spiritual life like these days?
It's definitely better than it was when I was growing up. I thought, since going to church and praying was part of our routine, but it was a routine. And I was asking for things, and I didn't have faith. And I look at my life now spiritually and living life on life's terms. I've turned my will and my life over. My son passed away last year, and I used prayer and I used my spiritual growth that I've gotten through this program to deal with that. And knowing that he's in a better place than here on earth. And I didn't drink over it. And I was there for my daughter and my wife. And I owe it all to this program.
My observation, John, was at the time when we all learned about the passing of your son, there seemed to be this gathering of men that, I don't know how to describe it, but maybe you could, how you felt taking that particular loss into the rooms and to your fellowship and what that meant to you.
It meant a lot that I had the ability to share and be open and genuine. I think if you look at maybe my friends or people that still haven't gotten a real spiritual, they were just sorry, and it was just kind of a glancing blow, as it were, as opposed to here, just like anything, even if it's like somebody slips, you have a fellowship to lean on. Mm-hmm. And anything that's going on, I can call my sponsor, I can go out and, immediately it was like, hey, why don't you come out and play golf? Take your mind off it, just be with us. And those are all the things that I didn't have growing up. It was just be tough, isolate, be like water off a duck's back.
It's really great to see God working through other people, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, and I've seen that happen over and over and over and over in this room and in rooms like these over the years. Men who have lost spouses or children or parents. When my parents passed away, I brought it immediately into the rooms. 2 hours after I closed my mother's eyes at the hospital, I was sitting at the AA club, sharing with others, and just being able to get it out there, and knowing that there are people in the room who've gone through it, knowing that there's some common understanding and energy around that. It was a beautiful, beautiful demonstration of God's presence. Sounds to me like maybe you felt that as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we can rewrite the narrative, essentially. We're learning how to do that. Not take all the negatives and just woes me and get into your pity party. It's about the spiritual life, turning it over, God's will, and then you start seeing the miracles. And I've seen so many miracles, just that comforts me that I know my son is in a better place.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about it was that you were there for him 4 of the 5 years of your sobriety as a sober dad. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you were with him before that, and that's important too, but I'm sure it probably meant a lot to know that you could stay sober. And you stayed sober, so
yeah.
you've proven it.
Yeah.
Here we are a year later, you're still sober. Something you did must have worked, and so we've just talked about it, and I think it's really just a beautiful opportunity to see how God works in our life when these kind of things happen, and when people are open to allowing other people into their lives. And I know from your involvement in the program and seeing you in meetings and seeing you interact that you're just one of those people too. So I welcome your friendship and your willingness to do this tonight, opening up about some of the stuff you've opened up about. I know is not easy, but somewhere, someplace, there are people who will listen to this and say, wow, I felt that way, or I've had that situation before. And especially when it comes to things like the challenges you face with your son and the marriage and the parents, just knowing that there are other people around who your experience is going to help. If they're not in the rooms, they may be on the other side of the world. So I appreciate you doing this, and I want to thank you for opening up in the way that you did. Kind of put the message out there to others that sobriety is feasible and obtainable, and you're an example of it. So,
well, thank you. I mean, it's a great way of life. I just wish I started a lot earlier, as everybody says.
Yeah. You need to talk to some of these older guys who didn't stop drinking until they were in their mid-60s, and then you'll get a different perspective.
Yeah. But
But no, I know it's the what could have beens. We can entertain ourselves with those all night long, but the reality is that we're here. We're here now.
and I can bring it to young kids, and hopefully that they will have a better life and not live the misery that a lot of us have until we got sober later in life. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And, that's exactly what you've done in doing the interview here tonight. And again, I want to thank you for it. I love you, and I know that you're a good man and someone who I can count on in the program. And somewhere, someplace, somehow, someone's going to hear it and say, that's the guy who I want to be like. Or if not the guy like they want to be like, at least that's the kind of behavior I want to have. So,
thanks, Howard. I appreciate it.
thanks for doing this, John.
Thank you.
Well, my friends, that's it for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. I want to thank my friend John D. for sharing his story, and thank you for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the interviews in this podcast series, will you do a little service work by spreading the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience? This show is another helping hand of AA we can extend to alcoholics everywhere. AA Recovery Interviews is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all other podcast providers. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. Please also take a minute to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.